up in
College,
chat.
college, college. Good, good, good.
Good, good,
That's
good.
what you're trying to get at? Yeah.
Exactly. To dizzy, if you look at it,
I need to do a PSA. We are recording extra early this morning, and Doogles appears to not be able to use real words.
This podcast contains the arguably witty banter of two friends, Skippy and Doogles, that like to debate about investing. The content is intended to be entertaining and for informational purposes only, not investment advice. You should do your own research and consult a financial professional before using any of the information in this podcast, and especially before investing.
predict the future, my brother. Predict the future. Do it right now.
In the future, my retirement savings would grow nicely over an extended period of time.
That's the lamest. Can you imagine if someone came to you, you're a fortune teller.
I'd be like, you are lame.
You're a fortune teller. Somebody comes to you and they're like, put out your tarot cards, do all this stuff. And what you say is my retirement is going to grow. Super lame.
I think
Super
what's
lame.
really lame is your question to start the show.
No, because I'll predict the future right now. 62-10 victory today for University of Colorado.
I knew you were going to stay on the college football front. People are going to stop listening to the show if all we do is talk about college football. But since you opened the door, you were talking about the Colorado Buffaloes and the TCU Horned Frogs last week. Well, they made some waves. Here's a stat from that game that I find absolutely mind-blowing. There's an interception. I think it was middle of third quarter. Travis Henry, who also played both ways and played like 140 snaps, which is unheard of, made this interception. You see that, Doogles?
Obvious.
During that interception, he had closing speed of 7 yards per second, which is the fastest closing speed recorded by Real Analytics of the nearly 9,000 defensive backs in the database. Is that not insane? 7 yards in 1 second?
It's pretty fast. I don't even know how else. It makes me think about Tyreek Hill, like type speed, like that type speed, where it looks like somebody is speeding up the tape. You know what I mean?
Let me say it this way, Douglas, because I think you're not converting over here. Let's go yards to feet. That's 21 feet in a second.
No, I understand. You're not converting.
You're not impressed. You're like, oh, it sounds fast.
Yeah, I mean, I think
9,000
in hectares,
defensive backs, fastest ever.
I think in hectares. That's what my favorite part about the press conference that Prime did at the end of it was he was all lackadaisical. He's talking about his son and the yardage he had. He's like, yeah, he played a pretty good game, you know. What do you have, like 500 yards? Like as if that's not a record-breaking type situation. It was pretty cool to see the team explode last week. Pretty cool to see.
Absolutely.
Shall we hop in?
Let's do it.
Okay. New York Times had this piece this week, blew my mental models off the sheezy foheezy, had to read this Jeezy a couple teasies so I could understeezy what it was easy. It's called Americans Are Losing Faith in the Value of College. Whose fault is that? Paul Tuff wrote this giant. I'll tell you right now, the author of these pieces is so important many times, because if I'd read this piece written by somebody different, I might have been like, you don't do me none, son. But because it was Paul, who just has credibility in the space, right? He writes about inequality, all kind of stuff. I was like, this must be a thing. There's got to be a thing. I'm about to hit you with what the thing was, because I don't think you read this piece this week. It's a long article. And what it's about, because it talks about the value of college, which is what it gets to. But what it primarily is about is laying out this data from the Federal Reserve that has shown that when you look at the income premium of college, so how much someone earns if they do not go to college versus if they do, the income premium is still intact. You still make more money on average if you go to college. The net worth premium, so what they're saying, the wealth premium, has diminished rapidly over time. And they
because
did
the
this.
expenses has gone up significantly without the revenues matching. Correct?
Yes, but when with the mind blowingness, and this is where I would have thrown this out. I would have thrown this out with a different author. They broke it out by demographics, and ethnicity was the one that really blew my mental models. It was saying that if you come from a non-white household, there's basically no difference in wealth accumulation if you go to college versus not. The reason I say it blew my mental models is because in, I'll say, the anecdotal world, this doesn't match anything that I see.
Yeah, me neither.
But I think it's super interesting. Can I lay out some facts for you right quick? Couple facts here. So let me back up a little bit and give some people some information about this. If you go about 10 years ago, the early 2010s, and looked at the perception of college of folks in this country, he pulled from a few different sources here. One survey showed 86% of college graduates said that college was a good investment. 74% of young adults said college is really important. 60% of Americans said colleges and universities have a positive impact on the country, right? Basically, in summary, go back 10 years ago, people was like college, right? I mean, you talking Animal House type stuff. People wearing college sweatshirts up in
College,
gym.
college, good. That's
good.
what you're trying to get at. Yeah,
exactly. To Dizzy, if you look at it,
I need to do a PSA. We are recording extra early this morning, and Doogles appears to not be able to use real words.
I can't finish any of my words. I can start them real good, but it's hard for me to finish them. So if you come to Dizzy, we've now said that the college degree as a very important thing has fallen to 41% of folks saying it versus 74%. That's less than half if you look at that mathematically. A third of Americans say that they have a lot of confidence in higher education. And Gen Zizzles, that's Gen Z folks who were born recently. I don't remember when the date is, but something like, I think it's after 2000 maybe. Gen Z folks, 45%, say that a high school diploma is all you need to ensure financial security. So, headline, decade ago, college is the best thing that's ever happened since sliced bread and the invention of language. Today, what is college? Why is college? Why would I get college? So huge change in sentiment. Now let's look at the financial data. This wealth premium I mentioned. If you look at the expected wealth for four-year college graduates compared to high school graduates, the most fascinating part is, so what they did was, this is the Federal Reserve, St. Louis. What they did was they looked at people broken out into cohorts of a decade of birth. And they also broke this out ethnicity-wise. So if you were born in the 1940s, you know what I'm talking about when I say 1940s?
Do I ever? Yeah. The 1940s.
Everyone's favorite decade. In the 1940s, if you were born, for folks that were identified as Black, there was roughly a 250% wealth premium if you graduate from college versus just having your high school degree. If you go to people born in the 1980s, which is the last cohort of folks they looked at, so this is people that are, let's call it late 30s, early 40s today, it's basically zero. And if you look at people that were born in the decades that were between then and the 1980s, there was a downward trend. So that was people identify as Black. It's similar for people that identify as white, except that if you identify as white, there is still a premium. It looks like it's something like 40% is the premium now. So it's not really zero.
The premium used to exist for all ethnicities, and then it's slowly declined for all ethnicities. But for certain ethnicities, you're talking about Black folks,
zero.
But it's meaning that there's no benefit from simply a wealth perspective of attending college?
Yes.
Because you will still make more money over the course of your career, but the upfront costs to actually make that excess return in investing terms, you barely break even at the end of the day. That's all we're saying, right?
That's what they're saying. And the reason why they couldn't it's not conclusive as to exactly why. So it's hypotheses as to why, but you pretty much nailed it. I'll extend it out to one other thing. So there's one point that says, if you net worth assets minus liabilities, right? So if you go to college and you take out debt to go to college, then your net worth is lower because college has gotten so much more expensive. That's one part of it. There's another part that's saying that even if you did not go into debt to pay for college, but you use savings let's say, now you don't have savings, and therefore you can't do other things that require that savings to build wealth in other areas. It's less likely you're going to buy a house. It's less likely you're going to start a business. Like that's what the conjecture, right, they're putting out there is.
Yeah. So can I jump in with some stupid questions? I find this fascinating. I'm not super surprised by it. Some colleges have almost become a country club from my perspective. And I say that because they seem really expensive. And it seems like much of the learning is actually happening through networking. And if you network with the right crowd, who's on the right path, who comes from a certain socioeconomic background, your chance of like the rising tide raises the level of all boats. And it's kind of like you go to get in the socioeconomic circle of people who can attend the prestigious college, and then everyone benefits, right? So that's one hypothesis where if you came from a strong socioeconomic background, there's probably still some benefit there. But those are also the people that might not need to take out debt to get there and might have family backing, like family wealth, for it to not be an impediment to them starting a business or buying the home or whatever else, right? So what I'm wondering, this is maybe my stupid question, is like how much the socioeconomic breakdown there is, and then the tiers of colleges in this country, but also in the world, are drastic, from the Harvards and Stanfords to the ones I don't even know the name of that still charge a premium, that don't have great job placement rates, that don't have great graduation rates. Like I remember reading a book a couple of years back that talked about some of these colleges, even though they're not officially for profit, their graduation rates are so poor that they're effectively just robbing all the people that attend. And so they're selling something that doesn't actually, if you don't walk out with a diploma, your wealth does not increase in a meaningful way at all. So if you're not graduating folks and you're charging a premium, that's a whole different ballgame of an educational institution.
And you're talking about schools where even the income premium isn't there, right? This is where you're not even making more money. So in that circumstance, you have the costs, you might have the debt, but your income premium isn't even higher, so you don't have a chance.
And really, in that circumstance, I think there's some argument to be made that it's actually a negative.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like your wealth actually goes down more than gets to the break-even point.
Yeah. Now, agreed with all that. Here's my thing is, so I read this, I got flustered, okay, bewildered, bedazzled even. And then I said, really? But for really though? Because you said you weren't surprised. I was surprised. So then I went and I read the back end, of course, went and read like the research on the back end from the Fed. I went directly to
the study behind the article, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it started making me feel a little bit better. So here's not better. I'm not saying that's great. The rising costs and all that is not a good thing, but it made me want more data, first of all, because I want to see what the difference in, if you take net worth, right? We said assets minus liabilities. I want to see what the asset difference is. I think that's really important, because if let's say you buy $100,000 house and you have $70,000 in debt on that house,
mm-hmm.
Over the course of your life, there's the question of what ends up happening. Like, are you better off at the end of your life? Are your kids better off because you had that asset? Is a really important question that is not observed in something like this. And so what I want to see is, are these folks building up more assets such that maybe when they're 40, this is the case, but what does it look like when you're 60 or 70? And does that change their ability for the next generation to be able to have a more solid footing? These are the questions that started coming to my mind, because I think that if you just look at net worth and you don't look at the assets and liabilities separated, it doesn't paint the full picture of well-offness. That wasn't the point of this article. Like, if you go back to the title is Americans are losing faith in the value of college. Whose fault is that? And I think with that title, Americans are losing faith in the value of college, bingo. Like that's true from what the survey data says. It's not saying, is college worth it?
Well, and sorry to interrupt when I say I'm not surprised on this. I just know that the cost of college has been increasing at a rate much more quickly than the value that's being added. Like, I think that's a known fact going back 20, 30, 40 years. So eventually that catches up in the economics. That's the thing I'm not surprised about.
Yeah. That makes perfect sense. And I think maybe what I'm saying is I hope that the takeaway that people, when they look at this data, is not that college is not worth it. I hope that does not end up becoming the narrative, the overarching narrative. And then it's more looking at what the specific data says and what might lie behind it. And I think it would be great for them to lay out the assets and liabilities separately as well as net worth, because if investment in future is not something that Americans are willing to make, that's bad, period. I could see that as a potential takeaway here. And it gets back to the conversation that we've had a couple times around here around, I'll call it the American dream and whatnot. It just like sentiment in this country has been going down so much recently that we just need to spike that back up, right? We need to put a little, I don't know, scooting in the tootin'. I don't know what to say here. Light the fire. We got to do that. And so I just hope that that's not the takeaway here. But I thought the data behind this was like super, super fascinating. I'm gonna drop a couple more little points that won't be surprising here, and then we can go on. So they said if you break down the different ways basically that people paid for college in here, it's a non-surprising difference in how big of a bet you're making. So as an example, like when I say bet, I mean like picture this as if you're saying, I'm going to buy a stock, right? That kind of a bet. I'm going to buy a stock. If I take leverage out on that stock, what are the chances I'm going to make money? If I don't take leverage, like that kind of thing, that's what I mean as a bet. So if tuition's free and someone is definitively going to graduate, then there's a 96% chance, they say, that it's going to pay off for you wealth-wise.
Well, and the 4% there is probably like you studied a major that is architectural underwater basket weaving in the Pacific Ocean, like something that just has literally no value, which is hard to pull off.
Yeah. That's if you choose a business degree or a STEM degree, there's a 75% chance it's going to pay off.
Okay.
They didn't break out underwater basket weaving specifically, but let's put that at less than 75% chance of paying off. Okay. So if you're then paying for college, but there isn't a guarantee that you're going to graduate, but it's still free, there's still a good chance it's going to pay off. I think it was like around 60%, something like that. That's going to pay off for you.
Yeah.
The worst group, obviously, is if you go to college, you have to take out debt, so it's not free, and you don't graduate. That group is effectively, it brings down the whole 9 yards around here. No bueno for that group. So it's mixed when you start breaking down the cohorts. Interesting article. We'll put on the Substack. Go and read it. Do not take away the fact that people should not go to college from this. Do take away the fact that college costs money, and you should think intelligently about how you pay for it, what you study, and what other debt you might have.
To me, it's that simple. I just think not everyone needs a iPhone 15 Pro that's going to come out next week for whatever, the $1,200. Some people barely use their phone, and they can get by with a $200 phone without issue. Be smart about what you're buying. It's just another thing you're buying. And if you're not studying for a STEM degree or a business degree or something that has clear market value, like I just think the consumer here needs to be more intelligent about what they're paying for.
I was talking to someone about this article this week, and they brought up how there are people in their circles that had this mentality that's like, just go to the best school, no matter what it costs. Make sure that you go to the best school and get as many degrees as possible. She's like, and I got friends that have like law degrees and master's degrees and all this stuff, and then they don't even study law, and they end up in $150,000 in debt. And you're working a job that barely required the bachelor's degree in the first place. And so that's an investment that wasn't as well thought through. Maybe.
Well, it wasn't an investment. It was mindlessly followed advice with, I'm not throwing shade, but I think it requires a little more. I think in the 60s, you could have said, go to college. There's a 98% chance it pays off. Like just go, mindlessly go. I don't think we live in that world anymore.
Yeah. it's kind of like the difference between saying, if someone's like, oh man, investing didn't pay off for me, you really shouldn't buy stocks. You go, well, yeah, you bought AMC on margin. Like that's don't do that and then say people should not invest in stocks. The particulars of how you do it is potent.
That's actually exactly what we're going to talk about, Doogles. So
Ooh,
this is me picking up breadcrumbs all week, last couple weeks. And so how prevalent these issues are with margin and leverage, I'm not sure, but I'm seeing the breadcrumbs around. I'm interested to see if you're seeing things. So I'm seeing the stories of the people that bought their Airbnbs and turned them into short-term rentals, all of a sudden struggling to pay the mortgage because the rental, the revenue is not what they expected. I'm seeing business owners in the small business space who had bought multiple businesses on margin, folding up shop and filing for bankruptcy. And I'm also seeing new ETFs coming out by people I really respect that employ leverage. And this is all basically just had my head explode this week. So have you ever heard, I promise I'll get to all those points in a roundabout way, but there's a new ETF came out this week from Newfound Research and Corey Hofstein. Like he does really good research, buddies with Cliff Asness at AQR, and like it has a podcast. Great guy. Know him just a little bit. So he came out with some return stacked ETF portfolios. And what return stacking means is basically they employ leverage to increase the amount of assets that you can own. And the simplest sense here, the most common one, it actually goes back to a fund from Wisdom Tree that takes a basic 60-40 portfolio and employs 50% leverage. So like you multiply the stock holdings by 1.5, you multiply the bond holdings by 1.5. For $1 purchase, you end up with 90% exposure to stocks and 60% exposure to bonds. Those are theoretically and most of the time not completely, but uncorrelated assets. And so that leverage typically won't come back to bite you. And the performance is great because you owned a little more of each of these assets. Over time, everything looks good. So I really dug into some of these ETFs this week because it's from people I respect. And I know they know what they're talking about. Does that make sense just in setting up the background there?
Yep. Makes sense.
All right. These return stacked ETFs, they're kind of cool. There's one that employs additional leverage for bonds and trend following. So that's like a really unique way to hedge against a downfall because the trend following piece, and what I mean there, if people aren't familiar, is basically a momentum. The trend can happen on the negative side or the positive side. And then the bonds would just be employed with leverage as well. So I'm digging into all these portfolios going, this is kind of a cool idea, right? And looking at some of these performance, Doogles, that 90%, 60% one, that Wisdom Tree fund, is averaged a compound annual return of 10.3%, with the worst year being only a 25% drawdown. The best year's at 40%. Like these metrics look incredible.
Is that entry year? When you say drawdown, you mean like entry year drawdown? A 25% or a year ended down 25%?
Total year, ending year drawdown. Worst max drawdown was 40%. This goes back to 1990, this back test here. And but if you compare that to the S&P, the S&P only had a 9.6% compound annual return and a max drawdown of 51%. So it almost looks like fool's gold, right? As you dive into these things, you go, wow, this is really incredible. But then you take a step back, because I don't use leverage in my investing. I don't think you use leverage either. And so I'm just in the middle of this deep dive going, why would I need to employ leverage when sometimes you forget the reason why things like this come out at this point in time? So let's continue to talk about the Wisdom Tree 90-60, and let's talk about what happened to stock market valuations since 1980. You went from a CAPE ratio of like 7 to a currently a CAPE ratio of 30%. So stock market multiples have gone way up in that period of time for the back test. And interest rates went from 18% to currently 5%. And for those who don't know, when interest rates go down, the inverse of that actually happens with the performance of the fund. So that
Or
went
bonds.
way up as well.
Yep.
Yeah, bonds. That's
Yep.
right. So you're really, when you look at a back test that employs leverage on something like a 60-40 portfolio, the past 30 to 40 years is the absolute best time ever to do that. So of course the back test and the actual performance looks incredible, but we don't live in that world anymore. And my point with all this stuff, I mean, really all I'm trying to say is the leverage is not for me, but I think these products get released at a time when the back test looks great, but that's not the world we live in anymore. I just get leery about the leverage piece. I don't really understand.
Agreed with you on the leverage point, and also I wouldn't say that back test looks incredible. You're saying that the return performance is 10% versus 9.6%
on a yearly basis, Doogles.
No, that adds up. That adds up.
Yeah, I mean that's
but
$50,000 on an initial 10K investment. Like
no, it adds up. But I think it's when you put those two things together. Like if someone says, I use leverage and my relative returns are incredible, I would expect more than a 0.4% premium, is what I'm saying, on something that is leveraged. I think that's the combination that I would say, because there's a risk that you're taking. To be fair,
it's a 0.7%.
Yeah.
But also, Doogles, that's comparing to the S&P 500, which is 100% equities.
Yeah, that's true.
It's not a just straight like leverage. I mean, you can buy those funds. You could just buy US equities and lever it. Anyway, so that's on the ETF side. On the small business failure side, I went back and forth with a gentleman there about learnings. And effectively it was, I took out too much debt. I tried to buy businesses too quickly. Yep. Not a surprise. On the short-term rental Airbnb stuff, like you already know the story.
Yes.
Those people did not walk in, pay cash, we get a really conservative cap rate, do those things. No, they did the same. They used a ton of debt. They probably did the minimum amount down. They looked at historically great periods where like Airbnbs as a business is still a relatively new thing. So people haven't ridden through cycles there. And I guess to me this week, that was where all my investing thoughts were. It was like, why are people so driven towards leverage? Because it just causes, you go back to the college article, right? Your probability of success of staying in the game is just drastically differently better if you don't have to take out debt to get there.
And I think you just nailed it with the last 2 points that you made there. One, to go to the very last point, staying in the game is the game. If you can stay in the game for a long enough period of time, assuming all things that we've thrown out before, assuming that the US remains a country that is vibrant, growing at 2% plus, whatever it is. If you assume all that, it's staying in the game is the game. And people forget that point. I think that's like maybe the number one most important point that can be made.
Yeah.
The other point that you said here when you were talking about Airbnb is that Airbnb has yet to go through cycles. I would even alter that by one letter and say Airbnb is yet to go through cycle.
Well, for many of those owners, I mean, some of those owners are people that have owned hotels and other things.
Yeah. But for Airbnb specifically,
for your average mom and pop that said, this is great, like this is my path to true wealth and it's easy and I can do it with other people's money, the cycle is gonna really suck for them.
And I think that is a fundamental answer to the question around leverage for a lot of people. Again, not for everyone. The people that have gone through cycles, many cycles, that's on them. But for the folks where their experience is basically from March 2009, which was the last real bottom, until last year, everything goes up into the right. Leverage the crap out of everything. You have 0% interest rates on a time period where assets are going up into the right. Yes. Why would you not use leverage during that time period?
Because you're going to lose your house, Doogles. That's why.
But you can't lose a house. You can't lose a house between March 2009 and last year. You can't lose a house. Yeah, I mean, this is people are basing, going back to the reversion to the mean conversation, not like that exact point, but just saying that when people's own means is that time period.
Yeah,
you leverage everything. I talk leverage everything. Like, why would you not? But that's not because it's not reality is the answer. The answer is because that's not the reality. That's one cycle.
My thinking here is has always been conservative, and I'm happy. Send us listener mail to tell me that I'm wrong, especially relating to the return stacked ETFs. There is quality research and really smart people behind those, and I know a lot of very intelligent folks that are super excited about some of those offerings. That's why I dug into it this week, because I've seen so much positive buzz from people I really respect. And I think in the right situation, if you know exactly what you're investing in, it could make sense for you. But I don't think it makes sense for me, because I'm not ready to use leverage in that way. Certainly not for a big chunk of my portfolio. And it feels pretty complex. It's no longer like making the simple investment that you think is below its intrinsic value, waiting for it to go above its intrinsic value, selling and rehashing. It's an entirely different ballgame, and I want people to be aware of that anytime leverage enters the equation.
You got to stay in the game, period. Okay, can I wrap this with a series of quickity hittities?
Yeah.
First and foremost, two things about cars. One is cars are becoming more expensive. We done talked about cars a whole bunch of times here. Cars are becoming more expensive in this country. The thing that there was this PBS article that I read, and the thing that actually hit me here is not the point that cars are more expensive, because I was like, yeah, sure. And it talks about how people are buying more SUVs because they just like to sit higher. I was like, yeah, sure. Americans are weird. The thing that caught me off guard was that it said there's only one car that's priced under $20,000 at this point. Maybe I read that a little bit wrong, but I was like, hold on, what? And it's and ironically, it's the Mitsubishi Mirage. So the one car that's under 20K is a Mirage. So there's that. That's what threw me off. The other point around cars here, that's point number one. Other point around cars here is that now that we have cars that are effectively computers that are going along the road, that privacy, it's the most invasive privacy debacle of a generation. My words, no one else's. Mm-hmm. They collect, I hadn't thought about, I mean, it's obvious, but it's something I hadn't thought about as much as all the data that cars collect without you consenting to it. And as I'm reading this piece, I was reading something in Verge. As I'm reading this piece about it, I went, oh yeah, it does collect that. So it's everything from, these are going to be obvious, but how fast you're driving, when you turn the steering wheel, where you're going, what apps you're using, like it's all that type of data as well. And then there's the data within the data. So things like your name, your income, right? Stuff that I wouldn't think that a car, sexy time. I don't know how many times sexy time needs to come up here, but it collects information about sexy time. It's like, don't even ask. It just does. It's kind of bewildering to me. Like again, when thinking about it, it's kind of obvious, because the thing I hadn't thought about is that there are cars now that have apps that you can download for your car. You know, you can like lock your car, start your car, and by downloading,
drive over to pick you up.
You can whatever. It can go to the grocery store. You can do whatever. Your cars can do anything these days. It can't do that. But the thing is that when you download that app, you've now downloaded an app to your phone. And when you download an app to your phone, that app can collect data from your phone about you. I hadn't thought about that point. And so now the car company has the information that is getting from the car itself, the information that is getting from your phone, and consenting to that is something that isn't necessary, according to what's been enforced so far. I hadn't thought about all that. Pretty interesting to me. It's probably not going to stop me from doing anything, but I hadn't thought about it.
Well, think about the bargaining power that, let's use Tesla as an example, has. You go buy a Tesla, you spent $40,000 to $80,000 with a conscious choice to say, I want this thing. And so then when you hit download the app and the screen comes up that says we collect 7,000 pieces of information about you, including like when you use the restroom, you just go yes, because you just bought the car. Like you just made a very expensive decision to say that's what I want to drive without thinking about the privacy concerns. There's huge negotiation power to collect whatever they want. And I'm sure there's value to have that information for the next sale or for the subscription product they're trying to sell you. So it's an interesting conundrum.
Fascinating. And I want to go back to the sexy time comment, because your question was the question that I had. How was the question? And 2 times in this article, it mentions collecting this data, but it just kind of like says it and then moves on. There's one that says, so one line, both Nissan and Kia are noted to allow the collection of information regarding user sex life. And then it just goes on. I was like, how? Then there's another piece that says the Mozilla Foundations, who ran the study. Mozilla found that numerous car companies collect sensitive user information like photos, immigration status, and even sexual activity. And then it just goes on. How? How?
Now, talk to me about, again, Tesla's the easy example. I think there's like 15 cameras recording at basically all times. Like even if you're parked and someone like bumps into you, I think the cameras turn on to try and figure out who is messing with your car. How much of that data is recorded and stored forever? Did it go into any of that?
Like the length of time that it's held? I didn't read anything there. It might be in the the full report that I didn't read from Mozilla, but it didn't go to anything like that. All right, my last quick hit. This is something you sent over to me, and it just follows up on what we talked about last week with regard to Nvidia and our boy in the apron, Jensen. Here's what the tweet says, but I can't think that this is fully the case. The timeline just doesn't seem right. The tweet says, Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang yesterday was awarded 89.1 thousand shares of Nvidia stock at a cost of $4 per share for a total cost of $356,000. He sold the shares for a total of $42.83 million, giving him a profit of $42.47 million. The part that I'm like, can't quite be right is that he was awarded the shares yesterday and also sold them yesterday.
No, he was clearly awarded the shares a long time ago. At a strike price of $4 a share when we're still in the 400s, right, Doogles?
Yeah.
I mean, this is where business ownership and working at the executive level of a large company can be mind-blowing, right? I'm pretty sure I can work hard my whole life. I don't think I'm gonna have shares vest at that value.
It's wild.
Pretty wild, right?
It's wild. Just another day in the office for Jensen.
And then maybe you have it in front of you, but what he sold and for $40 million-ish like is such a small percentage of the actual shares he holds. I mean, he has millions upon millions of shares. So if he's smart, he'll be dumping more. Like he's clearly smart. There's a reason he's selling right now.
Exactly. Good for you, Jensen. Good for you. It's a wrap. Hit us for listener mail, skippydoogles@gmail.com. If you are employing leverage in an incredible way that's fail-safe, I'd love to hear about it. I'm sure you are. We love reviews, and we love for you to share the podcast with a friend. So hit a review on your favorite podcasting service. And there's also premium subscriptions available to support the show. skippydoogles.supercast.com. Thank you, everybody.
Peace.